Hello and welcome to the Daily Fantasy Whiff. I'm Big Italy 42. He's Josh Shepardson at BChad50. As we do each week, we're talking fades and stacks, and this week, actually, a pretty full slate, unlike what we've seen the last few Saturdays. So we'll try to keep this one fairly short and sweet for you. We'll run down game by game. Oakland at Baltimore is your first game, starting off at 7:05. You got Chris Bassett on the mound, who's actually been pretty good over his last few starts. Had a great game against this same team a few weeks back. Looks like he's a small underdog here to Miguel Gonzalez. 8-run total here. As far as stacking, I don't mind either side. Oakland guys obviously getting a great park shift. They're also very cheap. You got men's salary, Stephen Vogt, $2,300. Josh Reddick on FanDuel. Both those guys just crazy cheap. So you could stack that. And then, of course, the Baltimore side. Yes, they did just get dominated by this same pitcher a few days ago. But you got some huge bats here. Chris Davis, Manny Machado. Those are the two guys that really stand out to me. So I guess I prefer the Oakland side, but I don't mind a stack on either side here.
Yeah, and I mean, you'd like him against the lefty, but Adam Jones is still a potent offensive bat. So you got some mini stack potential there, but I just love Camden Yards. It's a really good offensive environment. The lefties really get a nice home run boost there. So the guys that you named, Vogt and Reddick, look pretty good to me. But I'm fine with stacking or mini stacking both sides of this. Both teams went off last night. Might slightly inflate their ownership, but probably not too greatly. There are some other games tonight, some other ballparks, some other totals that people are going to be on. So I do like both stacks tonight, and I'm not crazy about either pitcher. I'm with you, though. Chris Bassett does have some GPP upside.
Certainly. Next up, another guy that I kind of like in GPP as far as pitchers go. Arizona at Atlanta, 7.5-run total. Patrick Corbin, a -150 favorite. We know the state of this Atlanta offense. Even if you wanted to stack it, you wouldn't feel good about it because there's not even one specific hitter that you need to get here. I mean, probably their best hitter right now is AJ Przinsky, and he's in a lefty-lefty matchup. So that right there just tells you I'm not stacking Atlanta. I do like the lefties from Arizona. We talked about it before because Mike Fulton went much worse against lefties, but their righties are pretty damn good too. I mean, you got Wellington Castillo, of course, Paul Goldschmidt, AJ Pollock. So for me, I like Corbin and GPPs, and I like the Arizona side.
Yeah, and one nice thing on FanDuel, which it seems counterintuitive, but the righties that you'd use are kind of pricey on FanDuel, and that's going to depress their ownership a bit. So if you like a cheaper arm that you can stick in there with that Diamondback stack, it's going to serve to depress their ownership. They're not at Chase Field, which does hurt a bit, but I do like that stack, and I do like some of the lefties in that lineup. Hopefully you see an Ender Enciarte out there with David Peralta, and then you get those two plus Goldie and Pollock, and you got a nice combination of power and speed, and you get some lefties in there against Fultonwitz, and you're looking pretty good.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm with you there. And then next up, Pittsburgh at the New York Mets. Low total in this one, 7.5 runs. Jonathan Neese, the most marginal favorites at -110. And this one's going to be even more interesting if Starling Marte returns because we know he crushes left-handed pitching. He's very cheap, especially on FanDuel, just $2,900. But I think that the rest of these guys have been hitting lefties well enough anyway. Of course, we know Andrew McCutchen throughout his career killing left-handed pitching. You've got some other options. You've got Jung Ho Kang, who's been hitting lefties pretty well. So this is a viable stack, but you do have a couple of key pieces that you don't really want against the lefty. Pedro Alvarez, Neil Walker, better from the opposite side of the plate as well. But I do like on the other side targeting some of these New York Mets lefties against Charlie Morton, who has pretty significant splits from lefties to righties. 384 WOBA allowed to lefties.
Yeah, if Terry Collins strings some of these lefties together, it could make for an interesting stack. But I'm with you. If Starling Marte's back in, that's a really nice stack for the Pirates, especially if they arrange their order in a way that allows you to get some of these lefty killers together, guys like Kutch and Marte and Gong. And as you pointed out on the FanDuel podcast, Polanco's hitting everyone. He could be your interesting play in that stack because you don't typically use Polanco against lefties because he does have a sizable career platoon split. But with his current form, I have no problem grabbing him and hoping he continues to swing a hot bat.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like you almost, if for nothing else, just a filler with some decent floor for your stack there. Next up, we have the Cubs at the White Sox, the Battle of Chicago, and got a couple pretty good pitchers on the mound for this one. We got Jake Arrieta facing off against Jose Quintana. Arrieta minus 118 favorite, 7.5 run total. The Cubs are in ridiculously good form right now. Everybody hitting, but as you pointed out earlier, they don't hit left-handed pitching particularly well. Their two best hitters at right now, at least, Kyle Schwarber, Anthony Rizzo, both left-handed. Both have hit lefties a decent amount, but Quintana also has been very good at limiting damage so far this season. He's got .73 home runs per 9. He's got a nice, tidy 29.7% fly ball rate, so keeps the ball on the ground pretty well. I'm not stacking either side of this. I don't like stacking the White Sox, especially against a guy like Arrieta, because there's not that many consistently good hitters.
No, and I do think that the Cubs will be slightly overowned. I mean, I don't understand it, but Jose Quintana, I believe, is one of the more underrated pitchers in baseball. 3.23 FIP, 3.45 xFIP. Strong strikeout rate at solid strikeout rate at 20.6%, but strong walk rate at just 5%. Yep. He does not beat himself, and he's pitched really well again this year. And as you noted, two of the best hitters in that lineup are Rizzo and Schwarber, and while both have hit lefties, Quintana's tough as nails on lefties. So I'm not going to stack either side of this either.
Yeah, completely with you there. Angels at the Royals is our next game. 7.5 run total. Mr. Johnny Cueto is a minus 160 favorite against Matt Shoemaker. We know how this has been going with Kansas City. Obviously, you're not stacking the Angels against Johnny Cueto. He's been very good since going over to the Royals as well. And that's a nice ballpark for pitchers, of course. But on the Kansas City side, we're talking about it's kind of hard to stack sometimes because you've got Morales and Hosmer both at first base. But for me, whenever I'm stacking Kansas City, I like to go Kane, Hosmer, Moustakas, especially on FanDuel where Moustakas is very cheap. Get yourself some cheap power there, and then maybe just leave those three guys. I mean, you might not even need a fourth piece of your stack, but it kind of just makes sense if you just throw Alcides Escobar in there at a weak position where you just give yourself that nice high floor for cheap. But at the same time, I'm not going to be stacking this team a lot because Matt Shoemaker, while he is prone and susceptible to fly balls and home runs, he has been pretty good over the past month.
Yeah, had a rough start against the White Sox, but otherwise has been pretty much locked in. And this is a lineup, the Royals lineup that you don't think of power, really up and down it. They do have some guys who can sting the ball, but I'm with you. If I'm stacking this, it's probably more like a mini stack with Kane and Hosmer and Escobar or Zobrist or Moustakas. I mean, guys, handful of those guys, but I don't think this is a team that you need to go full-blown six-person stack on DraftKings. Pick a handful from the heart of the lineup and then be done with it.
Yeah, absolutely. Cleveland at Minnesota, one of the higher totals on the night. This is going to be a prime spot for stacking. 9-run total. Josh Tomlin against Tyler Duffy. And I'm sure you're asking who when you hear about these pitchers, and that's exactly the response you should be having. Neither one of these guys a guy you want to avoid. Josh Tomlin wasn't a particularly good pitcher before. You found a nice little tidbit about him, so why don't you share that with everybody?
Yeah, checking the MLB probables page, usually it's pretty flowery write-ups. I mean, occasionally they'll point out if a pitcher's been struggling of late, but in the Josh Tomlin write-up for today, it noted that manager Terry Francona said that Tomlin's stuff, just the velocity's not where it was pre-injury, so that's not the kind of quote that usually you see or read, and not one to inspire confidence in using Tomlin. So it definitely inspires confidence in using power hitters like Brian Dozier and Miguel Sano against him, though.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, both sides of this one certainly viable with some big-time upsides. So
and fairly cheap. Both sides of it are pretty cheap.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, I don't think it's a bad option to go ahead and stack both sides of this, and you can still get at least an upper middle tier pitcher to pair with him there. So definitely going to be interesting. Going to be harder to do that on DraftKings, but on FanDuel, very, very cheap on both sides. So that's going to be a very viable stack. Next up, Philadelphia at Milwaukee. Jimmy Nelson hosting Mr. Jerome Williams. And Jerome Williams is one of my favorite pitchers in baseball because I love to play any and every bat against him. This one's got an 8-run total, minus 170 for Jimmy Nelson. Obviously, Miller Park amplifying offense. We like to target lots of things here, and we've got some pretty big hitters that are fairly cheap. Jonathan Lucroy has been awful recently, but he's minimum salary on FanDuel. Nice price for him. Chris Davis starting to hit for some power. Ryan Braun starting to show up as well. If you need cheap pieces, you got John Segura, who doesn't have much upside, but he's got a nice floor. Scooter Gennett, another near minimum salary guy, and then of course Adam Lind anytime he's facing any righty, but especially a subpar righty at home. So Brewers one of my favorite stacks tonight.
Yeah, good ballpark, soft pitching matchup. I'm with you there. And on the other side of things, noted it on the FanDuel podcast. Yes, the Phillies have come out of the All-Star break winning games, but their offense still just middle of the pack. They don't really have the bats to get to Nelson tonight. They got a few lefties, which you'll want to get some lefties in there against Nelson, but Nelson's been pitching well. So as far as pitchers go, I like Nelson to use him, and I like Jerome Williams to abuse him, basically.
Yeah, this one's pretty simple, pretty straightforward. I mean, I guess if you want to go mini stack with some Philly lefties, because that is Nelson's biggest weakness, but it's not something that really stands out to me on a full slate. Detroit at Houston now. Justin Verlander versus Colin McHugh. Two guys who have been better previously in their careers. Verlander not so much the past few years, and McHugh been okay this year, but was a much better strikeout pitcher last year, which kind of takes away a little bit of the draw from him. But Miguel Cabrera, I wouldn't say it was a surprise return, but kind of snuck up on me at least. I wasn't expecting him to come back yesterday, but he's back now, so obviously that offense, a little bit more to worry about. But the interesting thing here is, despite being at Minute Maid Park, minus 150 favorite for Colin McHugh, only a 7.5 run total with two offenses full of powerful bats. So Vegas seems to think this one's going to be a pitcher's duel, which I think will keep their ownership levels down in tournaments. And I'm not necessarily going out of my way to stack against either one of these teams, especially because Detroit's an expensive stack. But due to the low total and the full slate, I think it's a viable option if you're making a lot of tournament lineups to go ahead and just stack both sides of this one and, get these guys at 5% owns in your big GPPs.
Yeah, it's rare that you can call either of these stacks contrarian, but with that low betting total, they might be just that tonight. Of the two sides, I do like the Astros side just a little bit more. Love that you can fill second and shortstop with well above average players in Correa and Altuve, but also really like Preston Tucker quite a bit in that. So, but as you noted, Miguel Cabrera's back. That definitely raises the value of all ships, so to speak.
Yeah.
And you've got guys like Victor Martinez and JD Martinez, and Ian Kinsler's been scalding the ball over the last 30 days and change. So definitely some viable options there, but that low total probably is going to scare a handful of people off.
Yeah. So I think, like you said, both it's just a ton of power. Anytime you have lineups with this much power, whether you like them or not, they're a viable stack in tournaments because they put up runs in a hurry. Miami at St. Louis next. Brad Hand against John Lackey. John Lackey, biggest favorite on the board. I guess tied for the biggest favorite on the board at minus 200. Just a 7-run total here. We have a bad offense in Miami against the pitcher John Lackey, who isn't great, but he's consistently good. Brad Hands is a pitcher who isn't particularly bad, but not particularly good. Was in the bullpen for a while. The one good thing he really has going for him is that he's only allowed one home run so far this season. And in 56 and 2/3 innings, does a decent job of keeping the ball on the ground. But a 15.3% strikeout rate tells you that everyone makes contact against him. It's not exactly hard contact. And this is also a Cardinals team that does not hit left-handed pitching well at all. Bottom 10 in the league. So for me, and I think for you as well, we talked a little bit before the show about it, you want to get maybe a mini stack of these Cardinals righties. You get yourself some Randall Grichuk. Why am I missing
Johnny Peralta.
Of course, Johnny Peralta. And then maybe Mark Reynolds if he's in the lineup because he does have upside. But, I mean, you just don't feel great about this because as a whole, this team doesn't hit lefties well. The one lefty you really consider because he has decent numbers against lefties would be Jason Hayward. But even that, I mean, he hasn't really shown much power upside. Very, very small ISO against lefties this year.
Yeah, I mean, it would be fun to pick on Hand if they had the right-handed bats to do it, but when you're two table setters, for goodness sakes, your 1-2 hitters are both left-handed and they're in Matt Carpenter and Colton Wong, it really takes a bite out of a stack. But heart of the order, depending on what Mike Matheny throws out there, definitely see some viability to a mini stack, or at least hooking Grichuk and Peralta. And on FanDuel, I can tell you that's fairly cheap. Grichuk is $3,500, but Peralta just $2,700, I believe.
Yep,
$2,700. So you get a couple of righties end up with an average salary that's very, very easily affordable.
Yeah, and I never thought I would miss Matt Holliday, but if there was ever a day where I really wanted him to play, tonight would be that day. But obviously he's nowhere near a return, so don't expect a surprise Miguel Cabrera return tonight.
Yeah.
Next up, Tampa Bay at Texas, and this one's going to be an interesting one. Obviously, you got Chris Archer on the mound, but it is Texas. Colby Lewis on the mound, who we've seen good Colby Lewis and we've seen bad Colby Lewis this year. Really not a whole lot of in between. He's been a very unpredictable pitcher, but when he's had it going, he's had some pretty good starts. 8-run total here. We know this is a Tampa Bay team that hits lefties much better than they hit righties. They also strike out at a decent clip. So, I mean, I love Chris Archer as a tournament play because we know he's got massive upside. And I don't think that Colby Lewis is a terrible option either because, I mean, he has had some performances. But just put it in perspective, some of his recent FanDuel performances, 11, 6, 13, 18.66, 16.3, 9, -5. So all over the map here. But like I said, this is just not a particularly good Tampa Bay offense. So for me, despite it being in the hot weather there, it's only an 8-run total. I like Archer in tournaments. I don't mind, I guess, throwing out Colby Lewis at his price.
Yeah, I mean, I get it. And the thing is you look at the bats that are probably the most feared in that Rays lineup, and you're talking about Longoria and Forsythe, and that's pair of righties. And Colby Lewis, for all his faults, is very good against righties. His fastball slider combination plays really well against them, and it's lefties that get to him, and there's just not a lot of lefties that you like in this Rays lineup. Guys like John Jaso, Grady Sizemore, James Loney, Kevin Kiermaier. If these guys are hitting consecutively in the order, maybe you mini stack them because the ballpark factors are so nice in Arlington at Ranger Stadium, but certainly not a game that I'm bending over backwards to get exposure to.
Yeah, I'm with you there. I think that you can get creative with this one, but not one that I'll be too brokenhearted about missing out on completely tonight. San Diego at Colorado, just in case you didn't realize, at Colorado means Coors Field. So 10.5-run total here. Andrew Kashner versus Jonathan Gray. And Jonathan Gray has had 2 major league starts, 10 innings pitched. He's done pretty well. 9 strikeouts, almost a strikeout per inning. Just 6 hits throughout that time. So, I mean, this is a guy that hasn't been bad necessarily. Only one of those starts in Coors Field. Andrew Kashner is the guy that I'll be picking on here for the most part. He's a fine pitcher in his own right, but he is awful against left-handed batters. 388 WOBA, 12 home runs allowed this season. Unfortunately for him, all of the best bats, except for one, in this Colorado lineup are all left-handers. So Carlos Gonzalez, Charlie Blackmon, Nolan Arenado. Take your pick with any of these guys not named DJ LeMahieu. Ben Paulson. I'll be stacking Colorado, but unlike yesterday, it's kind of flipped we were talking about. Yesterday, we wanted to target the Padres because they were in a better spot and kind of avoid the Rockies, and that was a fairly lucrative option, and now it's the opposite tonight. You want Colorado bats, and you don't feel like you need to have many San Diego bats tonight against Gray.
No, very righty-heavy Padres lineup. Your best players in that lineup are your outfielders Kemp and Upton, and it's a righty-righty matchup with John Gray, which you certainly don't like as much as the matchup they had last night. I think you're going to see some people chasing Jed Jerko's performance, but again, righty-righty, Jerko much, much better against lefties. And ditto on Derek Norris. So obviously a slight value boost to Yonder Alonso, who should be back in the lineup, I would think. Took a seat yesterday with Norris playing first and Hedges catching, but again, not bats that I'm thrilled with. And the total's high. I just don't love the matchup for the Padres tonight. So stacking this game, definitely going to stack the Colorado side of things, but maybe just grab some one-offs from the Padres. I just don't see a stack being super lucrative tonight, and I think it's going to be relatively popular, even though the factors aren't great, just because it's Coors Field.
Yep. Yeah, I'm with you there. Maybe make your stacks, get your pitchers you like, and use your San Diego bats as fillers maybe in your GPPs. Yep. I don't think that's a bad way to go. Some, like you said, some one-offs. Stick them in there where they fit, but don't feel like you have to go out of your way to get a ton of exposure. Next up, Cincinnati at the LA Dodgers. Brett Anderson is tied with John Lackey as the biggest favorite on the night, -200. 8-run total here. And I think I'll let you give your take here so I don't look like the one that's just saying this because, I
mean, Brett Anderson, he's been solid this season. Fairly low ceiling, but I mean, before in show prep, you and I talked, and Brett Anderson's John Lackey-like, basically. You take your innings pitched, You chase that win, and you hope you get a couple of punch-outs. I mean, you're not going to get a ton of strikeouts from Anderson. The Reds are not a big strikeout team, but he is the sizable betting favorite. Anderson has, for most of the year, been pretty good at piling up innings, and the Reds just aren't that super potent in an offense. But I will say this: they do have some lefty mashers, and I think they make for an interesting stack. Kind of, I like Joe. You got to like Joey Votto against anybody. And anybody that throws a pitch, they could throw it with their left hand, right hand, both hands. I would like Joey Votto. Todd Frazier stumbling out of the break. Really like him against all lefties, though. He's absolutely hammering them. Yesterday, he had an ISO over 400 against lefties on the season. Not sure what that's at just yet. But I mean, he's around 400 ISO against lefties on the year. And then Marlon Byrd hammers lefties as well. Really cheap on FanDuel at just $2,600. So you've got some lefty mashers in there. I do, and while Dodger Stadium doesn't enhance run scoring, it does enhance home run production. So definitely some power in there, and we like power quite a bit here on the podcast.
Yeah, and I did look that up. It dropped down to a pathetic 393 ISO now against lefties. So last time I checked, that was pretty good. So I'm with you there. Get yourself some power bats from this side. Like you said, Frazier, Votto, Suarez, all these guys hitting lefties pretty well right now. Marlon Byrd, I mean, all those guys. Dodgers side, I mean, it's they don't hit lefties well. So you get your guys like your Scott Van Slyke, who hits lefties. Yasiel Puig hits lefties pretty well, but even he's very inconsistent. Enrique Kike Hernandez, whatever you'd like to call him. I guess we should ask which one he prefers, because FanDuel and DraftKings seem to be split on which name he prefers. But yeah, this one it's going to be interesting. I think it'll be low owned either way, though.
Yeah, I mean, it really is going to depend on what Donnie Baseball wants to do with his lineup tonight. If he strings some of these lefty hitters together, if you get your Kike Hernandez, Scott Van Slyke, and Puig in there in some sort of order where you get some lineup symmetry or synergy, I should say, then it becomes interesting. But if they're just sprinkled roughshod throughout the lineup and they're separated all over the place, then it just doesn't become as enticing. Again, it becomes Padres-like in that you grab these guys as fillers as opposed to stacking.
Yeah, absolutely. And then our final game on the night, Jake Peavy against Gio Gonzalez. And this is going to be a fun one here, especially with the fact that it's a 6.5 run total. Wind, once again, gusty, blowing out. Looks like 12 to 17 miles an hour right now. Should you assume it'll be similar to that tonight? Saw some big runs scored last night in San Francisco. We saw a lot of GPP winning teams with some San Francisco stacks. They obviously won't be as low owned against Gio Gonzalez as they were against Max Scherzer last night, but because it is the lowest total on the night, but there's also some nice factors, especially considering Jake Peavy's 43.6% fly ball rate. That's not going to fare too well against Mr. Bryce Harper and some of these other big bats that haven't been producing particularly well. But we talked before the show, this is a game that's going to be fun to stack both sides up because you can get creative with this, and there's not going to be a lot of people on this with the 6.5 run total.
No, and it's a fairly cheap stack by and large. I mean, on FanDuel, you got two hitters priced over $4,000, and the rest are well under $4,000. So you got Harper, you got Posey, you've got some star power at each of those positions. You got guys like Matt Duffy, Anthony Rendon not having a banner year by any stretch, but we've seen him hit at a very high level at the big league level. Definitely some things you can do with this game, and I like it as a stack. I prefer the Giants side ever so slightly, but again, the Nationals, because they haven't hit the ball very well all year, really cheap price tags, and you can stick them around an ace and still be able to afford a Johnny Cueto.
Yeah, and my favorite way to stack this one's going to be, we know Brandon Belt does not hit lefties well in that lefty-lefty matchup, so get your other parts of this one and then slot in maybe your other favorite first baseman. Maybe like an Eric Hosmer. Yep. I mean, whoever your favorite first baseman is, Chris Davis, one of these big-time bats, and that'll kind of help set you apart. Well, maybe not if everyone does that now.
Yeah.
But, either way, that's going to wrap things up for us. Thanks for hanging out with us. Find us on Twitter at DF Cafe. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. Check out all of our great content at dailyfantasycafe.com.